Hello everyone, and welcome to episode number 4 of the Pan Future Society podcast. I am your host, Sean, and it is Sunday, June 12th, 2016. The first thing I want to get to today is a little bit of a rant about scientific consensus. In the last week or so, there's been news stories going around about a discussion on a television talk show. You might know about that between Bill Maher and Neil deGrasse Tyson. And the point was made by Dr. Tyson that anti-scientific comments are not limited to the conservative side of the political spectrum. And that is very true. Bill Maher is well known for some of his viewpoints on certain scientific issues not lining up with the scientific consensus. I'm not going to tell you whether to be liberal or conservative. I don't really care. But when it comes to issues of science, I do. If there is a scientific consensus on a topic, it's my viewpoint that you should probably believe it. Now, science is always changing. The scientific consensus can change, certainly, as new data is introduced into all the equations and whatnot. But I don't see any reason why someone who is a celebrity or a politician or musician of some fame or whatever should be the voice of authority on any matter of science. Now, it is human nature to want to believe people who say things that you already also believe, or that hold similar beliefs to your own. So if you are liberal, you'll tend to believe a liberal politician when he says something about science. If you're conservative, you'll tend to believe conservative people when they say things about science. So without getting too deep in the weeds about politics here, I would just encourage everyone there to slow down a little bit when you're discussing topics of science, medicine, technology, and spend a little time thinking if you have a viewpoint on something. Is it a bias? Do you think that just because you're liberal or conservative, or you have a certain religious or non-religious belief, that should not impact whether science is true, because that's not how science works. So just take a little time to slow down in this information-laden world and consider whether your viewpoints on a topic really are rational and logical. I know that is also against human nature, but it is worth going through that effort. All right, now on to the news. News of the moment this week, more materials science. Australian scientists at the University of Adelaide have found a way to embed microscopic light-emitting nanoparticles into glass. This opens up possibilities of having a window that will display the weather forecast on it, or a bathroom mirror that you can read your email on while you're brushing your teeth. There are some versions of this kind of technology that already exist, but this new nanoparticle technology gets us even closer to something that's really useful. They embedded the nanoparticles into glass using a new technique called direct doping, which works by synthesizing the nanoparticles and the glass separately before combining them together. This method of integration means that the nanoparticles and the glass retain their original characteristics. In previous attempts to do this kind of thing, it seems like the nanoparticles didn't quite work as well as they did, and the glass didn't quite work as well as it did. This new glass could also be used to develop sensors for medical uses or in nuclear facilities. And they're also working on things like 3D holographic displays that they could use this technology for. So, some interesting work out of Australia there. Light emitting nanoparticles embedded into glass. That is your news of the moment. All right, in this week's deep dive, science fiction as reality, or hey man, where's my jetpack? Futurism seems crazy sometimes, but what can we point to that used to be fiction and is now real? A lot of things that I'll be covering in future shows may seem impossible, unlikely, or at the very least, in that perpetual 10 to 20 years away window of no man's land of research and development. But there's a lot we can look at in science fiction that we do have now, or that at the very least, sort of the math works out on paper. I'm going to get first into sort of the idea of human creativity and of thinking about things that are impossible. And when I was researching science fiction, just kind of taking a look at how far back it goes, a lot of people point to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as the first true science fiction novel. There you have science being used as one of the main drivers of the story. But there are some hints of things that we could call science fiction going back hundreds and thousands of years even. I guess through our modern eyes, these things might seem like science fiction. At the time, it's more mythological when they were written. I guess people didn't have the language, the vocabulary to describe it as science. But I found references to ancient Indian poetry. In the Hindu epic Ramayana, written in the 4th to 5th century BCE, includes flying machines able to travel into space or underwater and destroy entire cities using advanced weapons. In the first book of the Rigveda collection of Sanskrit hymns, 1700 to 1100 BCE as the date I found in that, there are descriptions of mechanical birds that are seen jumping into space speedily with craft using fire and water. I also found reference to the ancient Hindu mythological epic Mahabharata. Please forgive me if I'm butchering that name. 8th and 9th century BCE. It includes the story of King Kakudmi, who travels to heaven to meet the creator Brahma and is shocked to learn that many ages have passed when he returns to Earth, thus making this story a time travel story. I also found the ancient Greek playwright Aristophanes had some works with elements associated with science fiction, including air travel to another world. In his works, The Clouds, 423 BCE, The Birds, 414 BCE, and something called The Peace. I did not find a date on that one. Another interesting reference I found is a Japanese tale of Urashima Taro, involving time travel to the distant future. I think that is 720 BCE, about a fisherman who visits an undersea palace and stays there for 3 days. After returning home to his village, he finds himself 300 years into the future, where he has been forgotten, his house is in ruins, and his family is long dead. Kind of grim, but that's sort of a trope that's come up in a lot of time travel stories. There's also a 10th century Japanese narrative, The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, which some people consider proto-science fiction. The protagonist of the story, Kayuga Hime, is a princess from the moon who is sent to Earth for safety during a celestial war. Later, she is taken back to the moon, and a manuscript illustration from the original text depicts a round flying machine very similar to what we think of as a classic UFO flying saucer. So obviously in the time that all these things were written, the idea of science as a separate entity didn't really exist. There was some chemistry, some notions of medicine that I'm sure people had. Also quite a bit of mathematical exploration and quite a bit of astronomy. But I think most of the storytelling falls into the category of allegory and mythology, trying to give people a specific message. I don't know if these stories were written for entertainment at all, but I do think it's for us to look at these now and just take in the creativity of the human mind, to be able to look beyond what we know is real, or what we think we know is real, and have this kind of imagination. There was a story, one of the ones that I've actually read, is called Micromegas, written in 1752 by the French philosopher and satirist Voltaire. It is also considered an early work in science fiction, and it describes traveling to other planets and meeting species of intelligence who are not human. And even for 1752, that is a pretty big stretch of imagination. Moving a little more into the modern era of science fiction, we'll start with Mary Shelley, who I mentioned earlier is often considered to be the first science fiction author with her novel Frankenstein. It was first published anonymously in 1818. While it is a horror story at its surface, and most people view it as that, Victor Frankenstein is a scientist and uses science in his efforts to conquer death. It could be thought that the story foreshadows our modern use of organ transplants and all the methods we use to bring someone back from the brink of death. In the story, lightning is used to give life to the creature. And is that really all that different from getting zapped with the paddles in a hospital if your heart stops? Well, a little bit different because you probably haven't been put together from multiple pieces of different people before that. But that element of imagination is there, and I wonder how much these things leapfrog each other. The author comes up with an idea that seems incredible, but then people continue to explore the possibility that, well, maybe that would actually work. I believe some experiments in electricity predate this story. Some scientists had hooked up like frog legs to some electricity and made them move, so there's something there, and I think that would give Mary Shelley the idea that electricity could be used. So we see the fiction and the reality leapfrogging each other throughout history like this. Perhaps even more interesting in Frankenstein is that the creature in the story seeks a place to fit in and argues that he has a right to happiness. Now, if you've only seen movie versions, in the movies, the creature is usually just depicted as a monster. But in the book, he is portrayed as a being who eventually comes to have a great deal of intelligence. And in his seeking a place to fit in and arguing for his own rights, it could give us a an opening to wonder what it means to be human. Shelley asks that question of this creature who's been pieced together from body parts and revived by lightning. Is it a human being? Does it have rights? And for us today, are we going to have that discussion about our computers and our robots? At what point does what we think of as a simulation of life become so indistinguishable from life that we have to call it life? Moving forward a little bit in time to Jules Verne. Jules Verne, very well known as an early science fiction writer. In particular, his novel From the Earth to the Moon, written in 1865. Most of the technological and scientific aspects presented in the novel are wrong or impractical, like the giant gun that would fire people into space. At least the way he designed it, it would most likely just kill the passengers in the craft. However, some of his calculations are fairly accurate, and I think the most notable item in the book is he used aluminum as the material the capsule is made out of. While aluminum is widespread today and used in aircraft and spacecraft and all kinds of high-tech construction, at the time Verne wrote the book, it was a very new metal, a new material, which I think those brand new cutting-edge things often become ripe for use in science fiction novels. It could have been that aluminum, nobody really figured out all the things you could do with it, so why not? We'll build spaceships out of it. Well, turns out he was pretty much right on that one. Another of probably the most well-known early science fiction authors was H.G. Wells. Among his many fictional works, there are imaginations of what future life would be like, and his influence on imaginative science fiction and scientific thinking is undeniable. However, for my purposes today, I want to mention a work that he wrote called Anticipations of the Reaction of Mechanical and Scientific Progress upon Human Life and Thought. First published in 1901. That extremely long and nerdy title is often just shortened to Anticipations. Anticipations was actually just an essay that he wrote. It is a nonfiction work that he wrote to imagine what the future might be like, rather than putting that in the context of his fictional works. He actually made predictions about what life would be like in the future. Some of his predictions did not come true or were fairly off, but it is also remarkable how close he was on some of the items, particularly around transportation, how we would get around by automobile or by flight. He did think the submarine would never happen. I guess we proved him wrong on that one. Also made some very accurate predictions on communication, things like digital communication, radio, television, that sort of thing. So I really recommend that you check it out. It's a bit of a slog to read through, but it's very interesting how close he was on so many different items. And I do encourage you to read these stories too from H.G. Wells or Jules Verne or Mary Shelley. The cool thing about these, they are in the public domain. So if you're not going to your library to find them, you can find them usually for free online, your Amazon Kindle or various other online sources. Well, that is going to be the show for this week, but we are not done with science fiction, sort of a two-part show. Next week, I will be getting into 20th century writers like Arthur C. Clarke, as well as our television and movies like Star Trek and all the great things that were fantastic on TV in the 1960s that we actually have sitting in our pocket right now. Once again, I am Sean, and thank you for joining me again this week on the Pan Future Society podcast. Come visit the Society online at panfuture.org. Write me at sean@panfuture.org. You can come and find us on Facebook or Twitter. If you want to support the show, just drop me a message and I will let you know how to do that. And I will talk to you again in the future.